Everyone remembers the toast. Not the vows, not the first dance, not the cake that collapsed an hour later. The toast, my voice cutting through a ballroom full of money and good manners. You can still find it online if you know what to search for: a woman in a pale blue dress holding a champagne flute that trembles just enough to look human. I was smiling. Thomas was too. We both knew what was coming, though only one of us had rehearsed it. When I spoke, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. My brother's wedding had been filmed from 5 angles, the kind of production reserved for fairy tales and political fundraisers. Every light seemed to aim at me. I thanked the bride, the guests, the family. I even thanked Thomas for teaching me what love looked like when it stopped pretending to be kind. People laughed at first. They thought I was joking. Then they didn't. I can still hear the click of silverware against china as the room went silent. My brother's face drained of color. Thomas's smile cracked like sugar glass. His ex, seated 2 tables away, stopped mid-laugh and stared as if she'd been caught stealing. That was the night I ended our marriage, not with lawyers or shouting, but with a toast that sounded like forgiveness and tasted like freedom. But that's not where this story begins. It starts months earlier, before the wedding invitations, before the whispers. Back when I still believed Thomas's charm was proof of loyalty, not performance. Back when I believed that wealth insulated us from shame, that poise could protect me from humiliation. I was wrong about all of it. Thomas Henderson. My husband was the kind of man people described with words like accomplished and polished. He owned a portfolio of real estate properties and could talk about tax shelters like poetry. At dinner parties, he'd rest his hand on my back and introduce me as his better half, though I suspect he never believed that. His compliments were practiced, his affection transactional. I used to think that was just marriage, the quiet arithmetic of long-term companionship. But now I know it was rehearsal for betrayal. Our life together looked perfect from the outside. A glass house overlooking the river, 2 imported cars, a Labrador named Bentley, who preferred the guest room couch. I hosted charity events, arranged flowers that matched the drapes, and wore dresses that whispered money but never shouted it. We had everything except tenderness. The change started small: the way he began answering messages in another room, the way his smile stretched thinner each time I asked who was texting. He'd kiss my cheek and say, "You worry too much, Clara." Maybe I did. But women like me are trained to notice details, the small shifts, the silences between words. And silence in our marriage had become its own language. When my brother Ethan announced his engagement, I was genuinely happy. I loved his fiancée, Rachel, sweet, grounded, unpretentious. Planning the wedding gave me purpose again. I made spreadsheets, designed floral mock-ups, even convinced Thomas to sponsor part of the venue cost. For a while I thought it might bring us closer, but Thomas treated the whole affair like a business meeting, barely listening, always checking his watch. One evening, as we finalized seating charts, he said I might bring someone with me to the wedding. I laughed. "You mean a colleague?" He smiled without looking up. "Something like that." I should have asked then, pressed him. But the truth is, I didn't want to know. There's a strange comfort in ignorance. It lets you pretend the world still fits the shape you gave it. A week later, while organizing place cards, I picked up his phone by mistake. A notification flashed across the screen. "Can't wait to see you again. The dress is the same color you liked." The name below it made my stomach drop. Lauren M., his ex-wife. The text was sent 2 hours earlier. He was in the shower. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My hands shook, but I didn't delete it. I didn't confront him either. I just placed the phone back exactly where I'd found it. That's how women like me survive, not by reaction, but by observation. That night, I lay awake beside him listening to his even breathing, wondering how long he'd been planning whatever game this was. I thought about Lauren, the woman he once swore was the past. I thought about the wedding, the cameras, the crowd. And I wondered what kind of man would bring his ex-wife to his sister-in-law's ceremony. The answer was simple: a man who thought humiliation was a sport, and I was his opponent. So I began to plan not out of rage, but out of principle. Rage burns too fast. Principle lasts. The next morning I smiled as I served him coffee. He didn't notice my hands were steady again. Revenge doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with quiet mornings, with calm voices, with lists written in neat handwriting. Sometimes it begins with a woman staring at her reflection, practicing a smile she'll wear the night she takes her life back. Months later at the wedding, when I raised that glass, it wasn't about pain anymore. It was about timing, the art of control, the satisfaction of knowing that the man who taught me silence would be destroyed by my words. And when people ask if I regret it, I tell them this: no one regrets the moment they finally tell the truth. Perfection is a performance. That's something I learned from Thomas long before I learned the truth about him. To the world, we were immaculate. He, the charming businessman with a silver tongue and polished shoes. Me, the poised wife with tasteful pearls and a smile that could calm any storm. Together we looked expensive, composed, enviable. It was our shared illusion, our version of love curated, edited, and sealed behind glass. Most people thought we met at a charity gala. We didn't. We met in the waiting area of a law firm, both pretending to read. He had been consulting on a property dispute. I was finalizing my late father's estate. I remember the exact way he smiled, that confident, deliberate kind that made you feel chosen. I fell for that smile before I even knew what he wanted from me. He wasn't cruel at first. Cruelty is rarely immediate. It arrives slowly, disguised as concern. Our first year together was dazzling. Trips to Aspen, quiet dinners at candlelit restaurants, notes left on my nightstand that read, "My lucky charm." He made me feel seen until I realized I was being watched instead. He'd adjust my outfits before we left the house, comment on my tone when I spoke to waiters, tell me, "You're beautiful when you're quiet." I thought it was affection. It was control. Over time, I became fluent in his moods. I could predict his irritations before he voiced them, how his jaw twitched when I contradicted him in public, how his hands tightened around his glass when I laughed too loudly at someone else's joke. I adapted like a dancer, learning new choreography. Our marriage became a polished routine. On paper, we were the couple everyone envied. But at home, silence filled the rooms like humidity. Thomas would scroll through his phone during dinner, smirking at texts I never saw. He always said they were work messages. I pretended to believe him. Pretending became my second language. Then came the house on Maple Ridge, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. He bought it without asking me. A surprise, he said. It was breathtaking, sterile, and enormous, like a museum built to display us. There were mornings when I'd walk into the living room and see my reflection multiplied in the glass walls, each version of me smiling a little less than the last. My mother used to say money doesn't change people, it just reveals them. She was right. The more Thomas earned, the more transparent his arrogance became. He started hosting lavish dinners, the kind where laughter was rehearsed and no one finished their meals. Guests adored him. He was witty, generous, brilliant. They called me lucky. I'd nod politely, as if luck were something I still recognized. Sometimes, I think he married me because I looked the part. My family name carried social weight. My demeanor matched his ambition. We fit together like a brand campaign. And for years, I maintained the illusion, partly out of pride, partly out of fear. Fear of being pitied, fear of losing the security I'd been told was everything. There were moments, brief ones, when I caught glimpses of the man I thought I loved. A touch on my shoulder when I was unwell. A quiet, "You look tired. Take a day off." But kindness from Thomas always came with interest, something he'd collect later through guilt or leverage. I began to understand that in his world, love was a transaction and power was the currency. I kept journals back then. Not confessions, just notes, fragments of thought. One entry still burns in my memory. He wants applause, not affection. I am the standing ovation he expects every night. By the time Ethan announced his engagement, Thomas and I were barely speaking unless we were in public. Strangers might not have noticed. I'd trained myself too well, but Ethan did. One afternoon while we were tasting wedding cakes, he asked gently, "Clara, are you happy?" I smiled and told him I was fine. Happiness had become such a foreign word, it felt almost childish on my tongue. Still, Ethan's wedding became my project, a chance to pour beauty into something pure. Rachel, his fiancée, was everything I wasn't, any more hopeful, unguarded, radiant, without effort. Watching them reminded me of who I'd been before Thomas. Helping them plan their wedding became my quiet rebellion against the emptiness at home. Thomas noticed my enthusiasm. He liked the attention it brought, people praising the Hendersons for generosity. "You're a wonderful sister," he'd say, sliding an arm around my waist as photographers clicked. I'd nod, knowing he loved every picture that framed us as perfect. But each flash of the camera felt like a small theft of truth. The first crack in the facade came the night before Ethan's engagement party. I was reviewing flower arrangements when Thomas called from his study, voice clipped. "You forgot to confirm the wine selection." I apologized reflexively, habitually. Then he added, "Details matter, Clara." That's what separates us from people who settle. That word "us" used to make me feel chosen. Now it made me feel owned. Later, while cleaning up, I found an envelope addressed to him on the kitchen counter. I shouldn't have opened it, but instinct overrode etiquette. Inside was a printed invitation, a gala hosted by the same firm where he used to work. The RSVP line already checked yes, 2 attendees. Next to it in handwriting I didn't recognize was a note, "Can't wait to see you again." I traced the ink with my finger until it blurred. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to see the shape of what I'd been refusing to admit. When he came to bed that night, he smelled faintly of unfamiliar perfume, sharp, citrusy. He kissed my cheek, said goodnight, and fell asleep in seconds. I lay there watching the rise and fall of his chest, counting each breath until morning. That's when I realized something had shifted in me. I no longer wanted to fix us. I wanted to understand how a man like him could exist unpunished. In the morning, he was cheerful again, making coffee, whistling. He asked about the wedding plans and offered to handle the guest list so it feels balanced. I thanked him, pretending not to notice the faint smirk that followed. That was the first time I wondered who he planned to balance it with. By the end of that week, I'd decided 2 things: I would no longer protect Thomas's image, and I would not confront him yet. Power comes from patience, not noise. I began collecting details the way he collected trophies. Every receipt, every schedule, every small lie. My smile became my weapon, my silence my shield. From the outside, we looked perfect. Inside, I was building a case not for divorce, not yet, but for clarity. Truth, I realized, is the most elegant revenge of all. The morning the invitation arrived, sunlight spilled across our kitchen like nothing had changed. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the espresso machine and the faint click of Thomas's cufflinks. He was already dressed in his charcoal suit, preparing for yet another day of important meetings. I watched him from the counter, my robe loosely tied, hair still damp from the shower. To anyone else, we looked like the picture of domestic ease, two adults moving in practiced rhythm. To me, it felt like a rehearsal for a play I no longer believed in. "Your brother finally sent the wedding details?" he asked, glancing at the cream envelope in my hands. "Yes," I said, sliding my finger under the flap. "Formal garden ceremony. Black tie reception. Rachel wants it small, elegant." He smiled faintly. "Good taste runs in your family." He poured his coffee, took a long sip, and then added casually, "I might bring someone with me." The words dropped like a coin in a still fountain. Small sound, deep ripple. I turned slowly. "Bring someone?" "Yes," he said, folding the newspaper, not looking at me. "A business partner. Someone I've been consulting with. She's quite connected. Could be useful to Ethan if he's looking for investors later." I nodded, pretending to consider it. "I'll let Ethan know," I said, keeping my tone light. He kissed my cheek on his way out, his cologne lingering behind like a warning. When the door closed, I stared at the empty space he left. The silence pressed around me. She's quite connected. That phrase clung to me all morning. I opened my planner, tried to focus on floral vendors and catering calls, but my hand refused to move. By noon, curiosity had turned to dread. I needed to know who she was, the business partner good enough to be paraded at my brother's wedding. I remembered the text I'd seen weeks ago. Lauren M., the ex-wife. The woman whose name he'd erased from conversation, but never from his mind. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that no one could be so cruel, so deliberate. But Thomas could. Later that afternoon, I went into his office to drop off some documents. His laptop was open on the desk screen, asleep. My reflection stared back at me in the black glass. I told myself not to touch it, that I wasn't the kind of woman who snooped, but then neither was the kind of woman who got humiliated in front of her family. The password was the same as always, Bentley 2016. He'd never imagined I'd look. The inbox was tidy, organized, a digital reflection of the man himself. But one folder, innocuous in its label, caught my eye. Client relations. I clicked. There she was. Dozens of emails from Lauren Mitchell, the ex-wife I'd only met once years ago at a charity fundraiser where she'd avoided my gaze and left early. Their correspondence was professional, at first investment talk, property valuations, but then it shifted. Lines blurred. "I miss your sharp humor. Do you still take your coffee black? You always did prefer control." Each message was time-stamped late at night. Intimate hours. Intimate words. I read until the words blurred together, until my breath came in shallow bursts. There was one email I couldn't stop rereading, dated last week. "Thomas can't wait to see you again. Should I wear the blue dress you liked? I'll be your good luck charm as always." My stomach twisted. That was the dress she wore the night they met, he once told me. The one he said looked expensive enough to command a room. I closed the laptop, carefully wiped the desk with a tissue, and left everything exactly as I'd found it. No trace, no reaction. That night, I cooked dinner like nothing was wrong. Roast salmon, wild rice, lemon glaze, his favorite. He talked about the stock market. I nodded and refilled his glass. When he finally said, "You've been quiet tonight," I smiled, just tired. He didn't notice my hands weren't shaking anymore. Later in bed, he scrolled through his phone thumb, hovering over the screen, expressions soft. I knew who he was messaging. I turned away before he saw my eyes open. Sleep didn't come. Instead, thoughts looped in slow, deliberate rhythm. He's bringing her. To my brother's wedding. To our family. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a declaration, a message to me, to everyone. I can do this, and you will still smile. The next morning, I called my brother Ethan to confirm some wedding logistics. His voice was bright, full of excitement. Clara, Rachel loved your suggestion for the lavender accents. You're a genius. I smiled into the receiver, though he couldn't see it. Happy to help. By the way, Thomas may bring a guest, someone from work. Oh, he said, tone dimming. That's okay, I guess. I hesitated. Would that bother Rachel? No, not at all. Just, it's family day. But if he insists, he trailed off. We both knew what he wasn't saying. Ethan never liked Thomas much. He found him a little too polished, a little too proud, but he never interfered. That was our family's way, keep peace at all costs. After the call, I stared out the window. The river outside our house glimmered under sunlight. On the surface, everything looked serene. Beneath, the current roared unseen. That afternoon, I went to meet my friend Julia for coffee. Julia had been my roommate in college, sharp, loyal, unfiltered. She'd gone on to become a family attorney, the kind of woman who could dissect deceit with surgical precision. You look thinner, she said, sliding into the booth. I've been busy, I replied. Her eyes narrowed. Busy or anxious? I smiled, stirring sugar into my coffee. Can it be both? She waited, patient as always, until I finally said it. He's bringing her. Lauren. To Ethan's wedding. Julia's jaw tightened. You're sure I read the emails? Jesus, Clara. She exhaled, pinching the bridge of her nose. That's not arrogance. That's psychological warfare. I laughed softly. Thomas always said business was about dominance. I suppose marriage is too. What are you going to do? Nothing. Not yet. Her brow furrowed. You can't let him. I won't, I said quietly. But he doesn't know that. Julia leaned back, studying me. You sound calm. I am. I lied. But calm isn't the same as peace. Calm is the silence before a storm decides which direction to strike. That night, I sat at my vanity, brushing my hair until it gleamed. The reflection in the mirror looked like me, but sharper, colder. Behind me in the doorway, Thomas appeared, loosened tie, faint smile. You look beautiful, he said. I met his eyes in the mirror. Thank you. He kissed my shoulder, his breath warm against my skin. Don't worry about the wedding, darling. I'll handle everything. I'm sure you will, I whispered. When he left, I kept brushing my hair until it stopped feeling like mine. Then I wrote a single line in my journal. He thinks he's bringing her to humiliate me. Let him. He's the one walking into the spotlight. And in that moment, the plan began, not revenge, not yet, but intention. The first step toward reclaiming the narrative Thomas had stolen. Because if he wanted a performance, I would give him one. And I would make sure everyone remembered my lines. The morning of my brother's wedding dawned soft and golden, the kind of light that flatters everything it touches. I remember thinking how unfair that was. Beauty should belong to honest days. I woke before Thomas, lying perfectly still while his breathing filled the silence. For weeks I had rehearsed this day in my head, What I'd wear, what I'd say, how I would move through the crowd as if I were unbreakable. The dress I chose wasn't new. It was pale blue silk that whispered when I walked the same color I wore the day Thomas proposed. He'd said it made me look unreachable. That morning, I wanted him to remember that word. When he finally stirred, I was already at the vanity applying lipstick, my face a mask of calm. "You're up early," he said, voice still thick with sleep. "It's Ethan's wedding day," I replied, watching him through the mirror. "Some of us have responsibilities." He smiled, the kind that never reached his eyes. "You've outdone yourself, Clara. Always the perfectionist." I turned to face him. "And you, bringing your business partner." "Of course." He buttoned his shirt with deliberate ease. "She's already waiting outside." He said it like it was nothing, like the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. Outside, my tone didn't break. He glanced at his watch. "Yes. Lauren's punctual. You two will get along beautifully." It took everything in me not to react. I turned back to the mirror, finishing my lipstick with careful precision. "How thoughtful of you," I said. "Shall we go?" He didn't notice my reflection, the faint smile curving at the corner of my mouth like a blade. The drive to the venue felt endless. We sat in silence, the hum of the car louder than any conversation could have been. I watched the world blur past green fields, sunlit houses, strangers with uncomplicated lives. Thomas scrolled through his phone, occasionally smirking. Once he glanced at me, perhaps expecting tears or anger. I gave him neither. When we arrived, I saw her immediately. Lauren Mitchell. She stood near the entrance, sunlight glinting off her gold earrings. Her hair was shorter now, chestnut brown, and cut in soft waves that framed her sharp smile. She wore a navy dress that clung just enough to memory, and when she saw me, her expression flickered between discomfort and delight. "Clara," she said warmly, stepping forward. "It's been too long." I smiled, extending my hand. "It has. I almost didn't recognize you." Her eyes glittered. "Still as graceful as ever." "And you," I replied, "still enjoy a challenge." Thomas cleared his throat. "Ladies, shall we head in?" We walked together, the three of us, like actors entering the final act of a play. None of the guests knew they were watching. Inside the venue was breathtaking rows of white chairs framed by arches of lavender and ivy. Rachel looked radiant, Ethan beaming beside her. The orchestra played softly as guests whispered compliments about the decor. Everything was perfect, except for the tremor under the surface, a quiet electric awareness that something was wrong. It started with the stairs, subtle at first, then bolder. Guests noticed Thomas's ex-wife on his arm, the murmurs spreading like ripples through water. I caught my mother's eyes across the aisle. Confusion clouded her smile. She mouthed, "What is happening?" I simply nodded. I couldn't explain it without shattering everything at once. During the ceremony, I sat perfectly still. Thomas sat beside me, his posture proud, his hand resting on his knee, not mine. Every time he leaned slightly toward Lauren to whisper something, I felt the air in my lungs tighten, but I didn't look away. I wanted to memorize the moment, the arrogance, the audacity, the precise angle of his cruelty. When the vows ended and applause filled the garden, Thomas stood to fetch drinks. Lauren followed him. I stayed seated, clapping politely, smiling just enough for photographs. My hands felt like glass. Rachel approached, her eyes soft with concern. "Clara, are you all right?" "I'm wonderful," I said. "Everything is beautiful." She hesitated. "I didn't know Thomas was bringing her." "Neither did I," I replied. letting the words rest between us. But that's Thomas. He likes surprises. Her expression faltered. He's bold? Bold, I repeated, savoring the word like poison candy. Yes, that's one way to describe him. The reception began under a white marquee glowing with fairy lights. Laughter, champagne, the clink of cutlery, a symphony of civility. I watched Thomas glide through the crowd, introducing Lauren to relatives, colleagues, even the photographer. Every handshake felt like a bruise I refused to show. At one point, he approached me with a smirk. "You should meet Lauren's fiancé," he said lightly. "He couldn't make it tonight, but he sends his regards." How considerate, I said, my voice a calm ocean over a storm. "Tell him I appreciate his generosity in sharing her." His smile twitched. "You've always had a sharp tongue, and you've always underestimated it," I murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. The band started playing a slow waltz. Thomas extended his hand. "Dance with me." Every instinct screamed no, but instead I took his hand. The crowd turned toward us as we moved onto the floor. His palm rested at the small of my back, familiar and foreign at once. He leaned close, voice low. "Don't make a scene, Clara." I smiled for the audience. "Who's making one?" From the corner of my eye, I saw Lauren watching. Her expression unreadable, maybe even jealous. That made me smile wider. Halfway through the song, Thomas whispered, "Try to enjoy yourself. It's your brother's day." I tilted my head toward him. "You're right," I said, "and it will be a day to remember." When the music ended, the room erupted in applause. To everyone else, we looked harmonious, elegant. Only Thomas felt the faint tremor in my hand as I let his fingers slip away. I excused myself and walked to the garden terrace, the night air cool against my skin. I could still hear laughter from inside, but it sounded far away like an echo from another life. Julia found me there. She'd been invited as Ethan's legal consultant for the property transfer, a coincidence that now felt like fate. She touched my arm gently. "I saw her." "He really brought her." I nodded. "That's vile." I took a slow breath. "It's confirmation." Julia studied me. "What are you going to do?" I looked through the glass into the ballroom at Thomas, laughing, unaware. "Something beautiful," I said. And in that moment, watching him bask in his own arrogance, I knew humiliation wasn't the worst thing he could give me. It was the best gift, the permission I needed to end the illusion forever. The music that night was beautiful, soft strings, elegant tempo, the kind of waltz designed to make love look effortless. I'd chosen that playlist myself. I remember the irony hitting me like perfume, sweet, intoxicating, and a little sickening. Thomas stood beside me at the edge of the dance floor, all charm and posture, the kind of man who seemed sculpted for spotlight. Around us, people laughed and toasted the bride, radiant, the air saturated with champagne and the scent of roses. If anyone had asked, they'd have said it was the happiest day of our lives. Then the bandleader announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our honored couple, Clara and Thomas Henderson." My stomach dropped. I hadn't agreed to this. Thomas's hand was already extended, his smile wide and performative. "Come on, darling, don't be shy." Every eye turned toward me. Cameras lifted. Whispers fluttered like wings. I didn't have a choice. I placed my hand in his, the way I had 100 times before, but this time it felt like surrender. He guided me to the center of the floor. The lights softened. The melody swelled. His grip was firm, possessive, just shy of pain. "You've been quiet tonight," he murmured. "I've had a lot to observe," I replied. He chuckled low. "Always watching, aren't you? You should try enjoying yourself for once." I looked up at him, smiled faintly. "I am. This is educational." He blinked, confused, but the smile stayed plastered on his face. The perfect husband. As we moved across the floor, his hand slid to my waist. To the guests, it probably looked intimate, a picture of love rekindled. But beneath his palm, my body was ice. Every step, every turn, every polite dip of his head was choreography I'd memorized too well. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Lauren. She was sitting near the champagne tower watching us. Her expression was hard to read, maybe admiration, maybe jealousy, maybe both. Thomas followed my gaze and smiled smugly. "Don't tell me you're intimidated." I turned back to him. "By her," I said softly. "No. Pity's the word you're looking for." His smile twitched. The cameras flashed. We kept dancing. Halfway through the song, he leaned in close, his breath brushing my ear. "Don't make a scene." There it was, his favorite command. I smiled for the crowd. "You think too small, Thomas," I whispered. "A scene? I'm preparing an entire performance." He froze for half a beat, his rhythm faltering before he recovered. To anyone watching, it was a graceful spin. To him, it was a warning. The song ended. Applause erupted. I curtsied slightly, my expression serene. Thomas kissed my hand for the audience's benefit. The flash of cameras caught the exact moment his lips brushed my knuckles, the perfect husband, the perfect lie. When I stepped off the dance floor, I didn't look back. I needed air. The garden outside was quiet, draped in fairy lights that swayed gently in the night breeze. My heart pounded, not from emotion, but from clarity. The humiliation was complete. Everyone had seen his ex-wife on his arm. Everyone had seen me pretend not to care. That was his victory, public degradation, hidden under the guise of civility. But what Thomas didn't understand was that humiliation can be converted into something far more dangerous: purpose. I heard footsteps behind me. Julia's voice followed, low and cautious. "You shouldn't be out here alone." I turned. "I'm fine." Her eyes narrowed. "You're shaking." "Only from excitement." She hesitated, then handed me a glass of water. "He's showing off. The way he keeps looking around the room, he wants witnesses. He wants to see how far he can push you." I took a sip, let the coolness settle my throat. "Then he's already won, hasn't he?" Julia's tone softened. "Clara, listen to me. If you want out, I can help." Quietly. "You don't have to play his game." I smiled faintly. "Oh, but that's the fun part. He thinks it's his game." Her gaze sharpened. "You're planning something." "I'm preparing," I said. "There's a difference." Julia studied me as if trying to decide whether to worry or applaud. "Just don't underestimate him." "I wouldn't dream of it." From the ballroom, laughter floated through the open doors, bright, hollow, merciless. I turned toward the sound and watched Thomas at the center of it, champagne in hand, charming as ever. Lauren leaned in close to whisper something, and he threw his head back, laughing too loud. A few guests joined in, uncertain but eager to please. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow. Just an icy clarity, clean and sharp as glass. When I went back inside, the first thing I noticed was my mother watching me. She was standing near the dessert table, pretending to fix her bracelet. Her eyes found mine, searching for understanding, for reassurance. I smiled, the polite, practiced one I'd worn since childhood, and she relaxed. Good. The less she knew, the safer she'd be. I drifted toward the back of the room, where the noise thinned into soft murmurs. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes. I took one, studied the bubbles rising and breaking against the rim. There was something hypnotic about it, a pattern that always ended the same way: burst, vanish, repeat. A metaphor, maybe. For love, for patience, for illusion. Lauren appeared beside me, uninvited. Beautiful evening, isn't it? I turned slowly. Exquisite. She tilted her head. You've handled everything so gracefully. I'm not sure I could have done the same. I looked at her, really looked at the perfect curls, the carefully chosen jewelry, the faint nervousness she hid behind charm. You'd be surprised what grace can conceal. Her smile flickered. Thomas always said you had a sharp wit. And poor judgment, I added. You should know that by now. Her eyes widened just slightly before she turned away with a small laugh. Good night, Clara. Not yet, I murmured after her. The night's just beginning. By the time the last song played, the tension in the air was invisible but palpable. Even the band seemed to sense it, their tempo tightening, their smiles fading. Thomas gave a brief toast, thanking everyone for celebrating love and new beginnings. He raised his glass toward Ethan and Rachel, then toward me. I raised mine, back, the crystal stem cool between my fingers. Our eyes locked across the room. His grin said, I've won. Mine said, keep thinking that. As the applause broke out, I turned and walked toward the exit. I didn't need to see more. I had everything I required: the evidence of his cruelty, the witnesses, the memory of that dance. Humiliation completed the circle. Now came precision. In the car ride home, Thomas hummed softly, smug satisfaction radiating off him. I watched the city lights flash against the window, each one a reminder of the truth I now carried like a secret weapon. He thought the night belonged to him. He had no idea it had just become mine. In the weeks after the wedding, silence became my armor. Not the frightened kind that swallows pain, but the deliberate kind, the kind that listens, calculates, waits. Thomas mistook it for forgiveness. That was his first mistake. He came home the next morning, humming, freshly shaved, smelling like his most expensive cologne. Everyone was talking about the wedding, he said, pouring himself coffee. Quite the success. You looked beautiful, by the way. I smiled faintly. You always did enjoy a good audience. He laughed, not catching the edge in my tone. Come on, Clara. Don't be dramatic. Lauren's a colleague now. I was being polite. Of course, I said, stirring sugar into my tea. You've always been so gracious. He kissed my cheek before heading out, and I watched him go, his confident stride, the faint reflection of his grin in the foyer mirror. That's when I made the first entry in my new journal. Not the old one full of questions and longing, but a new one with black leather binding and smooth, empty pages. The first line read, Silence is preparation. A few days later, I met Julia for lunch at a quiet cafe by the river. She arrived in her usual no-nonsense style, navy blazer, neat bun eyes that saw straight through pretense. Tell me you didn't let it go, she said as soon as she sat down. I smiled. Of course not. I'm just changing strategies. Julia leaned forward. What does that mean? It means I'm done reacting. I'm collecting. Her eyebrow lifted. Collecting what? Proof, I said softly. Documents. transfers, assets. Julia's expression sharpened. You think he's hiding money? I know he is, I said. He used my signature on joint investments property deals I never saw. I used to trust him with everything. Now I'm going to take it back. Julia nodded slowly. Good. But you'll need to be precise. Legal revenge isn't fast, Clara. It's surgical. I smiled. I've got steady hands. That evening, after Thomas fell asleep, I went to his office. The scent of whiskey and cedar hung in the air. His desk was a study in ego-engraved pens, a framed photo of us smiling at a charity gala, a stack of unopened thank you notes from clients. I moved with care, wearing gloves to avoid leaving prints. The filing cabinet wasn't locked, of course it wasn't. Thomas believed control was its own security. Inside were manila folders labeled in his tidy handwriting, Holdings Clients Personal. I flipped through until I found one marked Henderson Trust Secondary Accounts. Inside were statements detailing investments made under my name properties in New Jersey stocks in boutique tech firms, all managed through a company called Laurent and Moore Associates. I didn't need Julia to tell me what that meant. Lauren Mitchell wasn't just his ex-wife. She was his accomplice. I scanned the documents, took photos with my phone, and replaced everything exactly as it was. Then on my way out, I paused in front of the photo on his desk. In it, we looked happy. I was wearing the same blue dress I'd worn to Ethan's wedding. I turned the frame face down. The next morning, Thomas was cheerful again. He poured 2 coffees and slid one toward me. Peace offering, he said. Peace from what? He chuckled. You're still upset about Lauren, aren't you? Should I be? I asked, taking a sip. You're overthinking. You always do. Maybe I said meeting his eyes. But then again, that's how I survive. He smirked. You make it sound like we're at war. I smiled. Aren't we always? He laughed, shaking his head as if I'd made a clever joke. I watched him walk away, knowing he wouldn't be laughing much longer. In the following weeks, I crafted my plan with the precision of someone who'd spent years pretending to be passive. Julia helped discreetly drawing up documents that restructured our joint holdings, small, unnoticed changes that would eventually shift control entirely to me. Every signature was genuine, every paper trail immaculate. At home, I played my part flawlessly. I cooked his favorite meals, wore the dresses he liked, listened to his endless monologues about leverage and image. I even laughed at his jokes. I became the perfect wife again, the one he believed incapable of scheming. He began staying out later, claiming client dinners. I stopped asking questions. When he texted Lauren, I didn't check his phone. I didn't need to. I already knew enough. One night over dinner, he mentioned a new development property. It's a small partnership, he said casually. Just a few investors. Under your name, I asked. Mostly. Some in yours, he said with a wave of his hand. Tax advantages. I smiled, nodding. Of course. You've always been the expert. That night I sent Julia the file. Within hours she confirmed he'd transferred significant assets into accounts where I was listed as co-owner, but not signatory. In other words, he'd used me to hide money. It was perfect. He'd given me the rope. All I had to do was tighten it. By the 3rd week, Thomas began to notice subtle changes. You've been different lately, he said one evening, eyeing me across the table. Different how? Calmer. I shrugged. Maybe I've accepted things. He smiled approvingly. Good. Acceptance is freedom. He didn't realize I'd already taken mine. That night I slipped out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The city lights spilled through the windows, painting long silver reflections across the marble floor. I stood there for a while barefoot, breathing in the quiet. For years, I'd thought silence was emptiness. Now it felt like strategy, a space where power could grow without being noticed. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my notebook. The next page was blank waiting. At the top, I wrote, Phase 2, Exposure. Below that, let him think he's safe. Let him walk into his own spotlight. I closed the book satisfied. By the end of the month, the pieces were set. Julia had secured the legal groundwork. My accounts were isolated, my inheritance protected, my ownership transferred. All that remained was timing the right audience, the right moment. And I already knew when that would be. Ethan's wedding anniversary was coming up, a small family celebration, intimate, sentimental. Thomas loved a good audience. So did I. When I finally lay down beside him that night, he stirred slightly, his arm draping lazily across me. "You're warm," he murmured. "I'm thinking," I whispered. "About what?" "About balance." He laughed softly. Always the philosopher. He drifted back to sleep, and I stared at the ceiling until dawn, tracing invisible lines between patience and retribution. The plan was simple: let him underestimate me, let him believe his illusion still worked. Then when the time came, I'd do what he always feared most: make a scene. But not in anger, with elegance, with poise, with the same quiet cruelty he once used against me. He'd taught me that control was everything. Now I was going to show him how easily it could be taken away. Forgiveness is a theater production, and I had become its most convincing actress. Every movement, every word, every expression rehearsed. That was the secret to control. You never let anyone see you rehearse. By the time autumn drifted into our town, the scandal of Ethan's wedding had faded into polite silence. People had stopped whispering about Thomas's unusual guest, though I caught the occasional glance when we appeared in public together. Society forgets quickly, but it never forgives. That suited me fine. I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I was interested in memory. Thomas, on the other hand, was thriving. His company had just closed a major deal, his smile broader than ever. He started taking me to charity dinners again, reclaiming our image, polishing the mask. Each time I stood beside him, the adoring wife, reborn, hand resting lightly on his arm. "People love a comeback story," he said one night, as we left a gala, the air crisp with October chill. "Especially when the wife learns to laugh again." I looked at him, genuinely amused. "Is that what they're calling it now, laughter?" He smirked. "Whatever it takes to move on, Clara. You do look happier." "I am," I said truthfully, "just not for the reasons he thought." That was the beauty of my plan, to make my forgiveness indistinguishable from surrender. He had to believe he'd broken me completely, that I'd chosen to stay out of weakness rather than strategy. The quieter I became, the safer he felt. The safer he felt, the more careless he grew. Our house became a stage again. Dinner parties, investors, friends of friends who spoke too loudly and left fingerprints on my wine glasses. I watched it all with detached amusement. At one of these gatherings, Lauren appeared. Uninvited, I assumed, though her confidence suggested otherwise. She greeted Thomas first, her tone light, too familiar. He looked startled, then pleased. I stood by the bar, pretending to study the floral arrangements. "Clara," she said, approaching me, "you look stunning. It's good to see you again." "Likewise," I replied, taking a measured sip of wine. "You're not upset I came?" "Why would I be?" You're practically family. Her smile faltered. Thomas said you'd forgiven him. I have, I said simply. Forgiveness is freedom. It was the same line Thomas used to use. She recognized it, I could tell. Her eyes darted briefly toward him, confusion flickering beneath her calm. You've changed, she said softly. I've evolved. I left her standing there, her glass trembling slightly. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, Thomas poured 2 drinks and joined me in the living room. You were perfect tonight, he said, settling beside me. Poised, gracious. Everyone's talking about how strong you are. Am I? He laughed. Of course! You're the envy of every woman in that room. Most wives would have fallen apart. I looked at him, studied his face. You'd be surprised what most wives are capable of. He mistook it for admiration and kissed me. I let him. It felt like shaking hands with a ghost. That night as he slept, I walked through the house barefoot, glass in hand. The moonlight spilled through the wide windows, casting silver shadows across the floor. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful. I took another sip, savoring the bitter aftertaste. Forgiveness, I thought, was just another kind of poison. You had to let it travel through your veins long enough for it to look like serenity. By November, Julia had finalized everything. The ownership transfers, the asset realignments, all legal, all invisible. He won't realize it until it's too late, she said during one of our late-night calls. I don't want him ruined financially, I told her. Not yet. I want him hollowed first. Julia hesitated. Emotionally, socially, I said. He humiliated me in public. He deserves the same stage. You've really thought this through. Every frame, I replied. Every word. She sighed. Clara, I have to ask, are you sure you can live with it? I already am. In December, Thomas hosted his company's holiday party at our house. For morale, he said. I called it what it was, exhibition. He loved the idea of filling our home with admiration, letting the glow of Christmas lights soften his arrogance. I dressed in red satin, the color of confidence disguised as festivity. As guests arrived, I greeted each one with warmth, laughter, and just enough vulnerability to appear renewed. Thomas watched me from across the room, pride gleaming in his eyes. He thought I was back, that his world had returned to order. Halfway through the night, he gave a speech. He thanked his team, his investors, his beautiful wife who stood by him through everything. Applause, laughter. I raised my glass and smiled. When he finished, I stepped forward. To Thomas, I said, a man who always knows how to keep the show going. The crowd chuckled. He grinned, not realizing I meant every word literally. Later, after the guests had gone, he turned to me, relaxed, euphoric. See, we're untouchable again. The past is behind us. Behind you, maybe, I said quietly. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I placed my glass on the counter and met his eyes. It means the past has a way of showing up when you least expect it. You should know you brought it to a wedding. He froze, searching my expression. I smiled, light as silk. Relax, darling. I'm joking. He laughed uncertainly and kissed my cheek. You've got quite the sense of humor these days. So I've been told. He went upstairs. I stayed behind, staring at our reflections in the glass of the sliding doors. 2 figures, perfectly framed, one oblivious, one patient. By New Year's, the illusion was complete. I had perfected the role of the redeemed wife. People adored me. Even Lauren kept her distance, sensing the shift but not understanding it. Thomas, lulled by my serenity, had begun to brag again about his success, his charm, his unbreakable marriage. He didn't notice the subtle changes, the way I stopped signing certain documents, the way my smile carried quiet mockery. On the night of our anniversary, he handed me a velvet box. Inside was a diamond bracelet. "To new beginnings," he said. I looked at it for a long moment. "You really don't understand what that means, do you?" He blinked. "What new beginnings?" I said softly. "They require an ending first." He laughed awkwardly. "You're being cryptic again." "Maybe I'm rehearsing." He frowned, confused. I fastened the bracelet, the diamonds catching the light. "It's beautiful," I said. "It'll look perfect when I raise my glass." He didn't ask what I meant. That was the night I finalized the last piece of my plan, the speech I'd been writing in my head for months. The one that would be delivered not with rage, but with elegance. The performance of forgiveness was complete. The next act would be the undoing. By late winter, the air outside carried that faint metallic stillness that precedes snow, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Inside our home, it was no different. Silence was our constant companion, polished to perfection. To anyone looking in from the outside, Thomas and I were a portrait of recovery laughter at dinners, matching coats on weekends, two professionals who'd weathered a storm and found calm. But calm, I'd learned, is only a pause between disasters. The spark came unexpectedly, as most do. It wasn't an argument or a confession, it was an email. It arrived on a Tuesday morning while Thomas was in his study. I had been reviewing the guest list for Ethan's upcoming anniversary dinner, a small celebration I was helping Rachel plan. My phone buzzed a message from one of Thomas's junior associates, mistakenly sent to our shared address. Subject: update on Lauren's withdrawal from the partnership. Thomas confirming Lauren's exit paperwork has been processed. As discussed, she'll retain 10% in silent shares for appearance's sake. For appearance's sake. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words carving something cold into my chest. He'd dropped her. Not for decency, but for optics. He'd used her the same way he'd used me, and he'd already moved to erase the evidence. There it was, the spark. Small, sharp, undeniable. When I entered his study a few minutes later, he looked up from his laptop, surprised, but pleased. "Morning, darling. You're up early." I leaned against the doorframe. "Just came to tell you Rachel confirmed the dinner. Next weekend." He nodded absently. "Excellent. I'll bring something special for the toast." I smiled. "You always do." He didn't hear the double meaning. That night I called Julia. "He's cutting her out," I said. She exhaled slowly. "You were right then. He's been funneling everything through her to obscure ownership." "Exactly," I said. "And now he's consolidating, which means he's preparing for something big. Do you want me to block the transfer?" "No," I said, staring out the window at the black river glittering under the moon. "Let him finish it, then I'll finish him." Julia was silent for a moment. "You sound calm." "I am. There's nothing left to feel, only timing." The following week passed in eerie tranquility. Thomas was affectionate again, almost tender, as if rewarding my supposed obedience. He brought me coffee in bed, complimented my new haircut, even suggested a weekend getaway. The performative gentleness would have once confused me. Now it only amused me. Every compliment felt like foreshadowing. every touch a countdown. On Friday, 2 days before the dinner, he surprised me by coming home early. "You'll never believe it," he said, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. Lauren's new deal collapsed. Bad investments. She called me this morning begging for help. "Did you?" I asked, carefully neutral. He laughed. "Of course not. She's toxic, Clara. I told her she made her bed." I nodded, smiling faintly. "And you never lie in beds you've made, do you?" He blinked, unsure if he'd heard me right. "What?" "Nothing." I said sweetly. "You must be exhausted. Dinner's in the oven." That night, as he slept soundly beside me, I lay awake counting the soft breaths between us. He thought he'd finally secured his empire reputation restored, ex-discarded wife pacified. He didn't know I'd already transferred his holdings into joint accounts that no longer existed under his control. Julia had finalized the paperwork that morning. Everything he thought was his wasn't. On Saturday, I began preparing for Ethan's dinner. Rachel had asked me to handle the toasts. She said my words always felt cinematic. I smiled when she said it. She didn't know how right she was. Thomas hovered nearby as I arranged wine bottles into neat rows on the counter. "You really do go above and beyond," he said, sliding his hand along my back. "It's family," I replied. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You know we should host something soon. Just us. Maybe at the country club. Show everyone how strong we are." I turned, holding his gaze. "I think we've shown enough, don't you?" He chuckled, mistaking my seriousness for modesty. "You'll thank me someday, Clara. Appearances matter." "Appearances?" I repeated. "Yes, they do." Later that afternoon, while he was out running errands, I went to his study again. It was the last time I would enter that room as his wife. The last time I'd play the obedient partner. I opened his laptop and searched his drafts. There, saved but unsent, was a speech titled "Future Partnerships and Reputational Vision." Inside it, he'd written lines about rebuilding trust through unity, about the loyalty of a devoted wife. He'd planned to use me again as proof of his character. I laughed out loud, the sound foreign in the quiet room. It was almost poetic. The man who taught me performance was about to be undone by a better actor. I copied the document onto a flash drive, replaced everything, and left. That evening, Julia called again. "Tomorrow's the night," she said. "Yes." "Are you sure you want it to be public?" "Yes," I said, steady. "Humiliation is the only language he speaks." "Then I'll be there," she said quietly, "just in case things go sideways." "They won't," I assured her. "Everything's choreographed." Sunday came clear and cold. The restaurant Rachel had chosen was intimate, a glass-walled conservatory overlooking the river, lit by candles and soft jazz. The table was long and elegant, adorned with silver and pale flowers, perfect for observation. Ethan hugged me when we arrived. "You look incredible, Clara." "Thank you," I said. "It's a special night." Thomas beamed, shaking Ethan's hand. "Can't believe it's been a year. Time flies when you're happy." Rachel smiled, unaware of the undertones slicing through the air. Dinner flowed easily, laughter, stories, wine. I played my part flawlessly, laughing at Thomas's jokes, touching his arm when he spoke. I watched him bask in the comfort of familiarity. Then, as dessert plates were cleared, Rachel rose with her glass. "Before we go, I'd like to make a toast," she said, cheeks flushed with happiness. She thanked Ethan, the guests, the family. Everyone clapped. When she finished, she turned to me. Clara, you should say something. You're the reason this all came together. Thomas smiled at me, proud, oblivious. Yes, darling, he said. You're always the eloquent one. I lifted my glass, heart steady. Thank you, Rachel. The table fell silent as I stood. My voice was calm, melodic. You know, it's funny, 1 year ago at another wedding I also gave a toast. A flicker of recognition crossed Thomas's face. This time I continued. I think I'll make it about truth. He reached for my hand under the table warningly. I let him. It's a rare thing, truth. Some people spend their lives decorating lies and calling them loyalty. I raised my glass higher. But the beautiful thing about masks is that eventually they slip. Thomas's grip tightened. Clara, he whispered sharply. I smiled, turning toward the room. To my husband, I said clearly, for teaching me how to perfect my performance. I couldn't have done it without him. There was polite laughter, uncertain, fragile. He forced a grin. She's joking, he said to the guests. Always the dramatist. But I saw the pulse jump at his temple. The spark was catching. The fire was coming. The night of Ethan's anniversary dinner burned into memory like a painting, every color precise, every detail deliberate. The silverware gleamed too brightly. The laughter was too crisp, and underneath the perfume and candlelight something metallic waited. I hadn't planned for it to happen there, not exactly. But sometimes fate and calculation meet halfway. The dinner table simply became the stage that fate offered. We were seated in a long rectangular arrangement, Ethan and Rachel at the center, their friends nearby, my mother at the far end, and Thomas opposite me. Julia had been invited under the guise of legal advisor for a property Rachel was selling, though in truth she was my silent witness. She'd chosen her seat carefully near the edge where she could see everyone without being seen herself. Lauren was there too. That part I hadn't planned. Thomas must have invited her out of arrogance or cruelty, perhaps both. When she arrived dressed in a crimson wrap dress, I felt a flicker of admiration, bravery, or stupidity, I couldn't tell. The moment she entered, Rachel's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered with grace. So glad you could make it, she said, voice polite, brittle. Thomas kissed Lauren's cheek, murmuring something about old times. He caught my eye across the table, daring me to react. I didn't. I simply gestured toward the seat beside him. You're late, I said evenly. We were just about to toast. Everyone chuckled awkwardly. The tension dissipated on the surface. Dinner unfolded like a ritual, the clinking of silver, the polite rhythm of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter too sharp to be real. I played my role perfectly, responding to small talk, smiling when appropriate, sipping wine, just enough to look relaxed. Thomas was radiant in his arrogance. He told a story about a recent business triumph, gesturing with his glass, as if the room itself belonged to him. Partnerships, he said, are built on loyalty. When you find people you can trust, that's when everything changes. I smiled across the table. Oh, absolutely. Trust is everything. Until it isn't. Julia's eyes flicked toward me, reading the signal. The air shifted. Lauren looked uneasy now, stirring her drink without sipping. She kept glancing at Thomas, who pretended not to notice. Maybe she'd finally realized that his charm was just a weapon disguised as affection. My mother, sensing tension, tried to redirect the conversation. Clara? Dear, how's your foundation work coming along? It's going beautifully, I said, keeping my voice soft. We're expanding next month. Thomas helped with the initial paperwork. Thomas smiled proudly. My wife is exceptional at logistics. Only because I learned from the best, I said sweetly. Julia choked on her water. My mother frowned, not understanding the subtext. By dessert, the air had thickened. It was time. Rachel, ever the gracious hostess, stood with her champagne flute. Before we finish, I just want to thank everyone. Family means so much to Ethan and me. We wouldn't be here without all of you. She turned toward me. Clara, would you like to say something? You've been such a rock for us this past year. Thomas smirked. Yes, darling. You always know how to give a good toast. The memory of that earlier wedding flickered between us, his smirk, my silence, the weight of humiliation. I set down my napkin carefully and rose. Thank you, Rachel, I said. I'll be brief. The room quieted. The sound of the river outside drifted through the open terrace doors, soft and rhythmic. 1 year ago, I gave a toast at another wedding. Some of you might remember. Thomas shifted in his seat, his smirk beginning to falter. Back then, I thought truth was something you owed to other people. I've since learned it's a gift you give yourself. I turned my gaze to him. You taught me that, Thomas. You taught me that truth, like power, is only real when it's public. A murmur rippled down the table. I lifted my glass slightly. So tonight I'd like to raise a toast to transparency. Julia's expression didn't change, but I saw her grip her phone tighter. She was recording. Transparency, I continued, means not pretending, not hiding behind other people's names, not using those you claim to love as shields for your deceit. Lauren's face drained of color. Clara, I held up a hand. No, please, stay. You were part of the lesson after all. Ethan's fork clattered onto his plate. Clara, what are you doing? Finishing something, I said calmly. Thomas, do you remember that trust account you created under my name? The one you used to hide assets through Laurent and Moore? His face stiffened. We are not discussing this here. Oh, I think we are, I said softly, because family deserves honesty. He rose halfway from his seat, voice sharp. Enough! I didn't flinch. Sit down, Thomas. You don't control this scene anymore. For a long moment, no one breathed. The sound of the river filled the silence. I set down my glass, my voice quiet but steady. You wanted a wife who wouldn't make a scene. You built a world where I was supposed to be quiet, obedient, elegant. But you forgot the most important thing about elegance: it draws attention. I turned slightly toward the guests. That's why everyone here knows your name. They've all seen your speeches, your charity posts, your perfect image. You love an audience. Then I smiled almost tenderly. So, here's your encore. I reached into my clutch and handed my phone to Julia. She pressed play. Thomas's own voice filled the room, his recorded calls, the smug emails he dictated aloud, his words about using Lauren's name as a cover, and his plans to keep Clara docile until after consolidation. Gasps. My mother covered her mouth. Rachel whispered Ethan's name, horrified. Thomas lunged across the table, but Julia was already on her feet. Careful, she said sharply. You touch her, and this recording goes public in seconds. He froze. The silence that followed was long and terrible, broken only by the faint clink of glass. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. I told you once that silence is preparation. This, I gestured to the phone, to the stunned faces around us, is the sound of it ending. Lauren stood, eyes glossy, humiliated in a way I almost pitied. You're both monsters, she whispered, then fled. Thomas tried to recover. Clara, we can fix this. We, I said quietly. There's no we anymore. There's you. And the truth. I raised my glass one last time. To honesty, I said softly. In all the places it never lived. Then I drank. For a moment no one moved. Then applause, hesitant at first, then building like the release of something long restrained. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Enough to let him know he'd lost. When I sat down, Julia leaned close. You rehearsed that, didn't you? I smiled faintly. Every line. Later that night, after the guests had scattered, I walked alone to the terrace. The cold air stung sharp and cleansing. Inside, Thomas was still arguing with Ethan, trying to salvage whatever could be salvaged. I didn't stay to listen. The fire had started. It was beautiful. The next morning began with stillness, the kind that hums after something breaks when the air itself doesn't yet understand what's changed. I woke to the sound of birds outside the window, their song light and aimless, as if the world hadn't just shifted overnight. The other side of the bed was empty. Thomas hadn't come home. I lay there for a long moment, tracing the sunlight across the ceiling, letting my body feel what my mind already knew it was over. Not just the marriage, not just the performance. The entire architecture of my old life had fallen quietly in a single evening. When I finally rose, the house felt foreign. His cologne still lingered faintly in the hall, but it no longer felt like intrusion. It felt like residue, a ghost smell from a life that no longer belonged to me. Downstairs, the dining table was still half set from the night before. I hadn't cleaned up after coming home. Neither had he. 2 glasses, one still half full. My lipstick marked one rim, a faint red crescent of closure. I stood for a moment studying it, then poured both glasses down the sink. As the wine circled the drain, I realized I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger had burned itself out long ago, leaving only precision and the faint ache of release. Julia arrived around 9. She didn't knock. She never did. She walked straight in, coat unbuttoned, eyes sharp with both caution and admiration. You look unnervingly calm, she said. I slept well, I replied. First time in months. She placed a file on the counter. You need to look at this. He's already calling damage control lawyers PR agents, maybe even a crisis consultant. But legally, he's paralyzed. The documents we filed went through at midnight. You own everything that matters. I nodded slowly, opening the folder. Property titles, asset lists, account confirmations. Each one stamped and finalized. It was done. Julia leaned against the counter, watching me. So what's next? I smiled faintly. Now I decide how loudly I want to end this. You mean divorce? Among other things. She hesitated. Clara, you got what you wanted. You exposed him. You took back your power. Do you really need more? I looked up at her, eyes steady. It's not about need. It's about clarity. Clarity? Yes, I said. For years, Thomas believed power came from silence. I want him to understand that silence only works until someone decides to narrate it. Julia exhaled. You're terrifying when you're poetic. I'm just focused, I said softly. He made my humiliation a spectacle. It's only right that truth gets the same audience. Later that afternoon, Thomas finally came home. I heard the front door before I saw him. The hesitant click of the lock, the pause of a man entering uncertain territory. He looked different, smaller somehow. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie gone, his eyes hollowed by a sleepless night. "Clara," he said, voice rough. "Thomas." He lingered near the doorway, not moving further inside. "I didn't think you'd still be here." "This is my house," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" He flinched slightly, glancing around. "You embarrassed me last night." "No, Thomas," I said calmly. "You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it." He crossed his arms, defensive but uncertain. "You could have talked to me. Privately." "I did," I said. "For years. You just weren't listening." He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Look, we can fix this. You've made your point. I'll issue a statement, something polished. Say it was a misunderstanding, that the audio was doctored." I laughed, a small, genuine sound that startled us both. "Still performing," I said. "You don't even know when to stop." His voice sharpened. "Do you really want to destroy me, Clara? After everything I've given you?" I met his eyes, unflinching. "You didn't give me anything. You rented me stability in exchange for silence. I just stopped paying." He took a step closer. "And what now? You think people will applaud you? You'll be the woman who humiliated her husband in public." "I already am," I said. "And I'm still standing." He searched my face, something shifting behind his anger, confusion, maybe fear. "What happened to you?" "I stopped trying to be lovable," I said simply. "And I started being real." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned away, defeated. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "You will." After he left, I sat by the window watching the river. The light danced across its surface, fractured but unbroken, the same way I felt. Julia joined me an hour later, bringing takeout and 2 glasses of wine. "Congratulations," she said, lifting her glass. "You survived him." I shook my head. "No, Julia. I dismantled him." She smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "And what are you going to do now?" "I haven't decided yet. Maybe you should rest." "Maybe," I said. "But I think I'm better when I'm creating." She tilted her head. "Creating what?" "A new version of myself." That evening, I went into Thomas's office one last time. The air felt heavy with old arrogance. His papers still littered the desk. Contracts, notes, fragments of a man who thought permanence was his birthright. I gathered the framed photo of us from the corner and stared at it. We were smiling in that picture, frozen in our own mythology. For a moment, I almost pitied that woman, the one who thought perfection was protection. Then I opened the window and let the cold wind in. The frame slipped from my hands, hitting the hardwood with a shattering clarity that echoed through the room. It didn't feel like destruction. It felt like punctuation. Later, as night descended, I found myself writing again, not lists or plans this time, but reflections. My handwriting was steadier than it had been in years. There's power in endings. Not because they erase the past, but because they redefine it. A woman who loses her voice becomes a ghost. A woman who takes it back becomes a mirror. And men like Thomas, they can't stand their own reflection. I closed the notebook and felt something inside me settle. Tomorrow I would call the lawyers, file the paperwork, and release a statement, not defensive, not cruel, just factual. I would move into the apartment overlooking the city that Julia helped me find. The house, the cars, the assets, all mine now. But none of it mattered as much as the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was earned. And in that quiet, I made my final decision. I wouldn't just survive this story. I would own it. Because forgiveness was never the ending. It was just the setup for freedom. It's strange the way memory edits itself. We think of it as faithful, but it's a curator selective and cruel. It preserves what hurts, blurs what heals, and plays certain moments on repeat until you learn the lesson hidden inside them. For me, that moment was Ethan's wedding. I had spent months trying to forget it, the music, the eyes, the humiliation Thomas orchestrated. But the mind is a loyal archivist. It brings back the scenes it knows you haven't yet finished with. And now, almost a year later, I found myself standing outside that same venue. Ethan and Rachel had chosen it again for a family event, this time a charity auction in memory of Rachel's late mother. "It would mean a lot if you came," Ethan had said. "People need to see that you're okay." He didn't mean to sound condescending, but the phrase "you're okay" landed in that quiet spot inside me where old pain lives. Julia had warned me. "You don't owe anyone your reappearance," she'd said. "I'm not going for them," I told her. "I'm going for me." Because I needed to face the place where I'd been broken, not to prove strength, but to recognize it. The sky was soft gray when I arrived, the kind of light that flatters honesty. The garden looked the same, lavender hedges, white stone steps, the faint sound of string music drifting through open doors. The only difference was me. The woman who had once walked through those gates had been a portrait of composure and captivity. The one walking in now was something else entirely, not perfect, but unshakable. Rachel saw me first. Her eyes widened and then softened. "Clara," she said, genuine warmth threading her voice. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I said, smiling. "But some ghosts deserve a proper burial." She squeezed my hand. "You look lighter." "I am," I said, and I meant it. Inside the ballroom was lit with golden light. Tables glittered with crystal and silver, the chatter of donors filling the air. Familiar faces turned as I entered, surprise, curiosity, admiration. My story had circulated in whispers, softened by time and gossip. To them, I was a cautionary tale turned into a kind of legend. I didn't mind. Legends were useful. They kept people guessing. I found Julia near the back, dressed in black silk, effortlessly composed. "You came," she said. "I told you I would." She smiled. "And him?" "He's here," I said quietly. "Of course he is." I didn't need to look to know where Thomas stood. I could feel it, that subtle static in the air, the self-importance that always entered a room half a second before he did. When I finally turned, I saw him near the bar, surrounded by a small group of admirers. He looked older, though not visibly diminished. His smile still worked, his charm still flickered, but it had the thinness of a man maintaining an illusion. His eyes found me. He froze for a fraction of a second, long enough for satisfaction to bloom quietly inside me. Then he raised his glass in mock civility. I returned the gesture with a small nod, detached and polite, as if acknowledging an acquaintance, not an ex-husband. It unsettled him. I could tell. Power, he had learned, shifts silently. The auction began. Ethan gave a speech, gracious, heartfelt. Rachel thanked everyone for their generosity. The air warmed with sentiment. And then, as if summoned by the universe's love for symmetry, the host announced, "And now, before we begin, Mr. Thomas Henderson has offered to say a few words." I nearly laughed aloud. Of course he had. Julia muttered, "He really can't resist a microphone." "No," I said. "He can't resist an audience." He walked to the stage, adjusting his jacket, radiating the familiar mix of confidence and performance. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice still smooth though thinner. Now it's a pleasure to be here among friends, family, and familiar faces. He smiled, glancing in my direction. A year ago, he continued, I learned a great deal about humility, about the cost of mistakes. But life is about rebuilding, isn't it? About grace. The crowd murmured approvingly. Forgiveness, he said, eyes sweeping the room, is the highest form of love. My jaw tightened. Julia whispered, You're not going to... No, I said, calm. He'll do it to himself. Because the truth about Thomas was simple. Give him enough rope and he'd always make a stage out of it. He kept talking about redemption, about how pain refines character. Each sentence was a mirror held up to the man he wanted to appear to be. Then he said it, the sentence that made the room shift. Some people destroy what they can't control. Others rebuild from the ashes. The silence that followed wasn't admiration. It was discomfort. Because by now everyone knew the story. They'd seen the video of my toast, read the subtle news pieces about the corporate fallout, heard whispers about how his empire had crumbled when investors withdrew. The subtext was too loud to ignore. I watched his confidence falter just slightly as he sensed it. He hurried to conclude his speech, thanking the hosts and the spirit of family. When the applause came, it was polite, perfunctory. He stepped off the stage and moved toward the bar, avoiding my eyes. Julia leaned toward me. Poetic justice delivered by his own mouth. Almost poetic, I said. Not quite finished. I waited until the crowd thinned, then walked toward him. He noticed me too late. Clara, he said, tone measured. You look well. Freedom agrees with me, I replied. He tried for a smile. I'm glad you came. It shows. Growth. Don't flatter yourself, I said. I came for closure, not nostalgia. His jaw tightened. You always did know how to perform, and you always confused performance for power. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The music swelled softly behind us, the strings wrapping around the tension like a ribbon. He broke the silence first. You won, Clara. You got everything. What more do you want? I studied his face, still handsome, still careful but hollowed out by what he refused to admit. Nothing, I said. Except maybe this. He frowned. What? For you to understand that you never lost me to another man. You lost me to myself. He blinked, speechless. I smiled. Goodbye, Thomas. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the same place where he'd once humiliated me. Except now he was the one being watched. Later, outside, the air smelled of rain. Julia joined me by the car, hands in her pockets. You sure that was wise? Wisdom isn't the point, I said softly. Completion is. She nodded, glancing back toward the glowing windows. You really have changed. I smiled. No, I just stopped apologizing for the change. As we drove away, the venue lights faded behind us, small and distant. I rolled down the window, letting the wind pull at my hair. The river gleamed beside the road, endless and alive. The same river that once reflected my shame now carried my freedom. It struck me then that revenge at its core isn't about destruction. It's about restoration of self, of dignity, of silence reclaimed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by the wedding that had broken me, because I'd rewritten it. Everyone remembers the toast. That's how it began, and that's how it had to end. A year had passed since Ethan's wedding, since Thomas's empire of appearances began to crumble under the weight of my silence and then my truth. I hadn't seen him since that charity auction. Our divorce had been finalized quietly, efficiently, legally, bloodless. He'd tried to fight, of course, but fighting requires footing, and he'd lost his the moment he underestimated me. Now here I was again, standing under soft golden lights, another gathering, another toast. Life has a cruel sense of symmetry. Ethan and Rachel were hosting a renewal ceremony, small, intimate, surrounded by family. I'd almost declined the invitation, but Rachel had insisted. "You need to reclaim it," she'd said. "That place, that moment, shouldn't belong to him anymore." And so I came. The venue was the same lavender-lined paths, polished marble floors, a river that shimmered like it knew secrets. Everything felt achingly familiar, but the woman walking through it now was not the same one who'd trembled behind a polite smile. I wore a white suit this time, clean lines, sharp shoulders, no softness to misinterpret. Power looked good on me, and peace looked even better. When the ceremony ended, Rachel found me near the terrace. "Clara, everyone's expecting you to give the closing toast," she said. I laughed quietly. Again, third time's the charm. I smiled, slow and certain. "All right." The guests gathered near the fountain, glasses of champagne catching candlelight. I looked out at the faces, familiar, warm, curious. The air carried the faint sweetness of lavender, and something electric underneath, as if the world itself was listening. When I raised my glass, a hush fell over the crowd. "Some of you," I began, "have heard me give toasts before. Some of those words were rehearsed. Some came from pain. Tonight, I want to speak from truth." The quiet deepened. I used to believe that love was measured by endurance, how long you could stay, how well you could smile through the cracks. But time has taught me that love, real love, begins the moment you stop pretending. A murmur rippled, soft, approving. Endings. I continued, have a terrible reputation. People treat them like failures, but they're just transformations in disguise. Sometimes you have to burn down the version of yourself that others built just to see what rises from the ashes. I saw Rachel's eyes glisten. Ethan squeezed her hand. I glanced toward the back of the crowd, and there he was, Thomas. Of course he'd come. Maybe out of vanity, maybe to prove he wasn't afraid of ghosts. He stood near the shadows, alone, watching. Our eyes met across the flickering light. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to silence again. The same silence that had once suffocated me now obeyed me. "This toast," I said, my voice steady, "is for everyone who's ever mistaken silence for weakness. For everyone who's ever been told to not make a scene. Because sometimes the scene is the only way to be seen." The crowd exhaled as one, some nodding, some smiling, a few clapping softly. I didn't look away from Thomas. And finally, I said, raising my glass higher to honesty in all the places it never lived. "May we never forget the sound of it when it finally arrives." I drank. The applause was thunderous this time, not shocked, not awkward, but full and alive. It rolled through the garden like cleansing rain. When it quieted, I turned from the crowd, setting my glass down gently on the fountain's edge. My heart was calm. The ghosts had stopped whispering. Thomas approached then slowly, like a man walking toward a mirror he didn't want to face. He looked older. His hair was thinner, his confidence worn down to a polite residue. "Clara," he said quietly, "that was beautiful. Thank you." He hesitated. "Was that meant for me?" Partly, I said, but mostly for me. He nodded, eyes dropping to the ground. I deserved everything you did. I just wish you hadn't done it so publicly. I tilted my head. You started this in public, Thomas. I simply finished it where everyone could see. He winced slightly, then sighed. You really never stop performing, do you? I stopped performing the day you left, I said softly. Everything since then has been truth. He looked up then, searching my face. Do you hate me? No, I said honestly. You're not worth hate. Hate is heavy. I travel light now. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. You've become cold. No, I said. I've become clear. He nodded, defeated. Then I suppose this is goodbye. It was goodbye a long time ago, I said. He lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked away, swallowed by the shadows that had once protected his pride. When he was gone, Julia appeared beside me, her presence grounding as always. You handled that beautifully, she said. I didn't handle it, I replied. I let it end. She smiled, lifting her glass. To endings, then. To beginnings, I corrected. We stood there for a moment, the two of us framed by candlelight and night air, the river whispering its endless song. I thought of all the versions of myself that had stood in this same place, the naive bride of performance, the wounded woman of silence, the strategist of revenge. Each one had lived and died, and made room for this one, the woman who could raise a glass not to pain, but to peace. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. And as laughter rose around us, I whispered under my breath, not for anyone else, not for an audience, here's to the woman I finally became. Later, when the last guest had gone, and the garden fell quiet, I lingered by the fountain. The champagne flute still stood where I'd left it, catching the faint glow of the lanterns. I lifted it once more just for myself. To silence, I said softly, not the kind you gave me, Thomas, the kind I built. Then I let the last of the champagne pour into the fountain bubbles, vanishing into ripples that shimmered like gold. That was my final toast. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself wanted to move softly around me. The light through my apartment window was pale and new, the kind that doesn't demand anything, just exists. I lay in bed for a long time, listening to the city breathe a distant siren, the hum of traffic, the faint clatter of someone's coffee cup 2 floors below. It sounded like freedom. There was no ring on the nightstand, no second toothbrush, no half-finished arguments waiting to be resumed. The emptiness wasn't loneliness. It was space. Real, unclaimed space. When I finally rose, I poured myself coffee and stood by the window overlooking the river. From this height, it looked different than it had from the house Thomas and I once shared. Back then, I saw the river as confinement, a border between what I was allowed to be and what I secretly imagined. Now it looked like motion, constant, alive, indifferent to who watched it. The video of last night's toast had already found its way online. Rachel had texted me at dawn. You're trending again, in the good way this time. I smiled, imagining the comments, some calling it inspiring, others dramatic. Let them call it what they wanted. I'd stopped measuring myself by how people labeled my story. Julia arrived mid-morning, still in her workout clothes, hair pulled back. She tossed a pastry box onto the counter. You're a national heroine again, she said. How does it feel to be everyone's symbol of poetic justice? I laughed softly. A little surreal, mostly peaceful. She poured herself coffee, studying me. I almost didn't recognize you last night. You looked done. Not angry, not vengeful. Just done. That's exactly what it was. Do you ever think about what you'd say if he called? He won't, I said. And if he did, I'd let it ring. Julia smiled approving. So what now? I'm writing again, I said. Not about him, about women like us. About the versions we shed before we find the one that fits. An essay. Maybe a book. Maybe just a letter to my former self. She raised her cup. To former selves, then. I touched my cup to hers. May they rest in peace. After she left, I opened my laptop and began typing. Not a story, not quite an ending, just fragments of understanding. There are two kinds of silence, the one that's forced on you and the one you choose. The first feels like suffocation. The second feels like air after rain. I know the difference now. The cursor blinked patient. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to edit myself. Around noon, I went for a walk. The city smelled of coffee and thawing snow. Couples passed by holding hands. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly on the corner. Ordinary life, the kind I'd once thought was too small for me. Now it felt enormous. I wandered without purpose until I found myself at the small park by the water. I sat on a bench watching the sunlight scatter on the waves. There was an old man feeding pigeons nearby, his movements slow but precise. He nodded at me. "Beautiful day," he said. "It is," I answered. "You waiting for someone?" I smiled. "No, just keeping myself company." He chuckled. "Best company there is." We sat in companionable silence. For once, I didn't need to fill it. That evening Rachel called. Her voice was warm, gentle. "You know, people haven't stopped talking about that toast." I figured, I said. Thomas left early. He looked different, smaller. I almost felt sorry for him. "Don't," I said quietly. "He's just meeting himself for the first time." She paused. "You think he'll ever change?" "No," I said. "But I did. That's enough." Rachel hesitated, then asked Clara, "Was it worth it?" Everything, I thought for a moment before answering. It wasn't revenge that saved me. It was finally telling the truth out loud. Once you stop lying to yourself, nothing anyone else does can hurt you. She sighed softly. "I hope I never have to be that strong." "You already are," I said, smiling. Later, as dusk settled over the city, I lit a single candle on my balcony and watched the flame dance against the wind. The view stretched far beyond the river, now glass towers, glowing windows blinking on like constellations. Somewhere among them, Thomas lived whatever remained of his life. I didn't hate him. Hatred is a tether, and I had none left. I whispered just once, "Goodbye," and felt the word dissolve into the night. Inside, I played an old record, one I hadn't listened to since before the marriage, a slow piano piece I used to love. The music filled the room, gently settling into the corners like a promise kept. I poured a glass of wine and stood in front of the mirror. The woman who looked back wasn't perfect or polished. She was whole. There was no mask, no performance, just light quiet and a faint knowing smile. I raised the glass not to Thomas, not to the past, but to the present moment itself. "To survival," I whispered, "to silence that sings." Then I drank. In the weeks that followed, life unfolded without drama. My book proposal was accepted by a small publisher. Julia helped negotiate the contract. Rachel hosted a launch dinner months later, filled with laughter instead of tension. My mother finally stopped looking at me with worried eyes and began calling me unshakable. Sometimes journalists still reached out asking for quotes about that night or about empowerment. I declined most of them. My story wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about closure. Once walking by the river, I saw Thomas from a distance. He was alone, staring at the water the way I used to. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded an acknowledgement, not an apology. I nodded back. Then we kept walking in opposite directions. That was the last time I saw him. On the anniversary of Ethan's second wedding, Rachel sent me a text. "We're doing a small gathering tonight. Bring that smile of yours." I typed back, "I'll toast from here." And I did. At sunset, I stood on my balcony with a glass of champagne and whispered the same words that had carried me through everything, to honesty in all the places it never lived. The wind caught the words and scattered them into the fading light. They didn't belong to him anymore. They belonged to me.